coming to you from a rock on the edge of an island at the end of the world. Almost. Specifically the island of Great Cumbrae. Cumbrae is one of two small islands, Great Cumbrae and Little Cumbrae, which sit a 10-minute ferry ride off the coast of North Ayrshire and the seaside town of Largs, which is just behind me. Largs sits right on the waterway of the Firth of Clyde, which filters right on down into the Clyde Valley and Glasgow, where I live. Largs is a popular destination for Scots looking to venture for a weekend away at the beach. That said, most of the Scottish seaside is egregiously cold and boring from experience, but Largs and the Cumbraes, they're alright. Today I'll be taking you up and around the perimeter and the island in the hopes that I can find you some more sick beaches, but most importantly, we'll visit some of the Isle's main landmarks. The highest lookout point, the Gladestone, venture on down into the tiny village of Millport on the southern tip of the island, or we'll find Britain's tiniest cathedral, the Cathedral of the Isles, and then head back up into a tiny beach forest, which contains the island's one and only standing stone. On the way through though, I'm going to tell you a tale about Vikings, because they were all over this joint in the 13th century, and the story is a bit more of a laugh than it should be. It's a story of international partnerships, maintaining cultural autonomy, and ownership, sovereignty. When I was prepping for this video over the last week, I pulled some tarot, as you do. I got the Two of Cups, the Nine of Pentacles, and the Ace of Pentacles.
The Two of Cups represents partnership. The Nine of Pentacles, an autonomous individual who owns everything about themselves and the land they live on. And the Ace, in a nutshell, symbolizes the new growth that can result when you balance the two former cards.
On the surface level, this spread reads that all healthy relationships can grow and benefit from autonomy. The need for humans to maintain their identity within a partnership is just as important as the partnership itself, because suffocating each other only leads to aggression, disappointment, and the collapse of the partnership. No one benefits from being owned by someone else. What does this have to do with the history between the Vikings and the Scots? It has absolutely everything to do with partnership, autonomy, and ownership. So now let's head on over to the highest point of the island, the Gladestone, and I'll tell you more of the story on the way. Between the 8th and 13th centuries, the northern and the western Isles of Scotland were subject to as much Viking conquest by the Norse as any other part of Britain. The main stronghold for the Norwegian settlement of Scotland was located in the Northern Isles, or the North Ayrshire as the Norse called them, of Orkney and Shetland. Shetland actually holds one of the best preserved ancient Norse sites in all of Scotland, the Jarlshof, and many of the smaller isles and place names of Orkney and Shetland today still reflect the Old Norse language. I'd be absolutely thrilled to take you to the Jarlshof one day. Let's make that a goal for 2021, shall we? But the Southern Isles, or the Suðuroyar as the Norse called them, were located right here on the western edge of Scotland, where I'm sitting. These southern territories expanded as far as the Isle of Skye, Lewis and Harris, Man, Mull, Drura, possibly Uist, and parts of the Argyll Peninsula, and filter right on down into the Firth of Clyde and the Cumbraes. Together, all these components of the North Ayrshire and the Suðuroyar formed the Norse Kingdom of the Isles. For almost 4 centuries, the Kingdom of Scotland and the Kingdom of the Islands were on fairly respectful terms, and Scotland even acknowledged Norwegian ownership of the Northern and Southern Isles as far as the mid-13th century. But that's when shit hit the fan, of course. And in the mid-13th century, just as the Celtic peoples were becoming predominantly Christian, the two kingdoms became embroiled in a battle for land ownership. Out with the pagans, I guess. In 1263, King Alexander III of Scotland challenged King Håkon Håkonsson of Norway to his right to the Suðuroyar. Despite 150 years of the Norwegian kings laying a fairly peaceful claim to the land, and after much back and forth, and you guessed it, a failed treaty, the international partnership between the Norwegians and the Scots collapsed completely. We're almost to the Gladestone now, so let's keep going. Aha, there it be. Right, so that was the Gladestone. I'm now going to take you down into the tiny village of Millport, but not before I show you some wonderful mountain views first.
That there, right in front of us, is the Isle of Bute, which is a beaut. It's one of the most gorgeous places I've ever been to. Past its hills, though, you can just about make out the tip of the mountain Goatfell on the Isle of Arran, which I will absolutely take you to the peak of one day, mark my words. They call the Isle of Arran Scotland in miniature, because of the way the landscape changes drastically in such a short distance from one side of the island to the other, similar to how the mainland of Scotland looks.
So I actually came to Cumbrae about 2 years ago now with the boy. We drove around the island in, I think, an hour flat because it's so tiny, and then hopped over a fence, which is just over there, climbed into a pine forest, and found a dead rabbit. Very eventful. The roads of Cumbrae have featured in 2 music videos of 2 separate clients I've had in the last few years, so I've got some good mileage out of this place, I have. Hello, Nosy, how are you? Sniffing? I'm sorry I don't have any food for you. Actually I do, but it's mine, so it's not a good idea. What's wrong? Aha, Millport. We go to there right now.
Just on the edge of the village of Millport, passing by some farms and harvest fields, you'll find Britain's smallest cathedral, the Cathedral of the Isles. Definitely worth a visit on your way into town. Unfortunately, during this visit, it was still shut due to COVID. I have been before though, and it is tiny, 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 with its own wee cemetery and a handful of resident wildlife. Absolutely lovely.
Here we are now in the main village of Millport on the southern tip of Great Cumbrae, accounting for most of the island's population, which sits just under 1,400. Little Cumbrae, which is just in the distance there, has no one living on it. There's just a wee lighthouse, and there was, at one point, a castle, I believe. Anyway, back to our tale. So in the autumn of 1263, King Håkon, who was a pretty big deal by the way, he's the guy that united Iceland, the Faroe Islands, and parts of Greenland under Norwegian rule during his reign. Håkon sailed his biggest fleet of ships he'd ever assembled right down through the Scottish Hebrides and into the Firth of Clyde. Here they settled, anchoring their Viking longships off the coast of the Cumbraes, where they prepared to attack the Scots at the Battle of Largs, and the Scots in turn prepared for them. But for some reason, to this day, the Scots make it out to be this massive sovereign victory for the reclaiming of land, except the battle was a total flop. Of the top 10 major battles of Scottish history, the Battle of Largs doesn't even make the list. And here's why. On the morning of October 2nd, 1263, the Norsemen advanced onto the shores of Largs in 2 parties. One half went up to the nearby mound, and the other half stayed on the beach. But when the Scots armies advanced, the Norsemen on the mound thought it best they not get separated from their comrades on the beach, and so they started to head back down the mound. Except their pals on the beach thought that they were retreating entirely, and so the guys on the beach started heading back to their longships. The Scots freaked out over this shambles, of course. All communication broke down, and what was meant to be the Great Battle of Largs turned into a much lesser and unnecessary skirmish on the sandy beach of a wee seaside town that is now best known for its Italian ice cream. Håkon was smart though. His men were based all throughout the Kingdom of the Isles at this point, so he only suffered a minor loss of men at Largs that day. He travelled back through the Hebrides to Orkney that winter, with the intent of regathering his troops and attacking again in the spring, except he died that December of natural causes. With Håkon gone, most of the unity that he inspired in the Kingdom of the Isles started to fade, and that is the only reason why King Alexander of Scotland was able to reclaim these lands in the years that followed. Orkney and Shetland, the Northern Isles, still remained under Norwegian rule, however, until the late 15th century. Just had a very basic pub lunch there in the nice town of Millport, and now I'm standing out on the slipway. I'm gonna head back through the town now and take you back up the path. We're going to head towards the only standing stone on the isle. I shall take you there. Apparently it's not very impressive because it's been knocked down quite a few times and propped back up, and there's a lot of graffiti from the 20th century on it. Oh well, it's still a standing stone. So let's do that, and then we'll head towards some beaches. Not that we're not on one right now, but yeah. And I like that I'm far out enough that nobody can see me talking to myself and get incredibly suspicious as to what is she doing? It's fine. It's fine. If I've not gotten used to it by now, I don't think I ever will. Let's go. You know that saying, all roads lead to Glasgow? Neither do I. I bet people are wondering why the boy hasn't decided to come on one of these travel videos yet. Truth is, we're 2 very different people. He likes his gritty city, drinking beer over a good book, in a seedy pub, whereas I'm the one who digs climbing the hills, staring at the sky and sipping whiskey over the hearth fire. Autonomy and partnership, right there. So back to the facts. The Battle of Largs was essentially useless, consisting of needless fighting, bad communication, and a whole load of hot-headed men looking for ownership over something that was never theirs to begin with. The only reason the battle gets any sort of clout these days is because of the resurgence of Scottish nationalism during the Victorian era. As those romantic Victorians were wont to do, they romanticized everything and ran with it. So the Scottish history of the battle that we have today is slightly biased because of this.
The Scots even built a 70-foot stone monument to the battle in 1912. They called it the Pencil, which is located 1 mile south of Largs, and actually nowhere near the proposed site of the actual battle. And fun fact, it wasn't even the monument the Scots originally planned on building there either, because the planners ran short of money in the process of commissioning it and had to build something much simpler than they'd originally intended.
So here we are, 8 centuries later, banging on about a pretty anticlimactic battle, for which the Scots have built a fairly mediocre monument they couldn't even afford, for a battle that they now celebrate to this very day with a yearly Viking festival in Largs that began sometime in the early 1980s. There's even a Viking museum. I haven't been to it yet. A fork in the road, and some very loud harvesting equipment. Let's go this way. So I've got this hunch that the standing stone is maybe somewhere in there. We're gonna wander along this road until we find something anyway, so. Or have to turn back, because that's always a possibility. Oh, she is. There it is. See it? Yeah, how do I get there is the question. Right, okay, I'm heading back around because I'm gonna get to it. I'm gonna get to that stone. So this glaring entryway looks promising, although cannot guarantee. Right, yes, absolutely 100% can guarantee this is the way in. Let's go. Here it is. This grove is so unbelievably gorgeous. There were several more of them at one point, you can actually see them. Slightly on the ground. Ownership, ownership, ownership. What's the point? Though I can understand how important sovereignty was to our Christian and pre-Christian ancestors, because land was all that they could own. Today, ownership means something so much different to us. Of course, the conflict between the Norsemen and the Scots can still teach us a lot regardless. While countries continue to battle over their individual claims to various parts of the earth well into the 21st century, we often forget the main message at hand here, that the ability to be autonomous and still work in partnership is where the richest relationships grow. Whether you're a couple, or the United Nations, or just hoping for Scottish independence. And the other message? That it's no good building monuments to celebrate a past partnership we can barely tell the story of without a bias. So what do you own? Not your partner, not your land, though you may have both of those for a time. But the real chat is, life's too short to spend it competing, because in reality, you can't take it with you. Did you hear that? You can't take it with you. Do you know what's on the other side of this? So that's us done at the standing stone there. Right now I'm gonna head back down towards the ferry, but I'm not gonna get the ferry just yet. Gonna wander on down to White Bay, which has some beautiful white sand and red sandstone jetties. And we'll sit there for a bit, maybe have a chat, watch the sunset, and then head on back home. Let's go. This is quite the walk, but very much worth it. And here we are, White Bay, which is situated on the northern tip of Cumbrae and looks out over onto the Argyll Peninsula. Thank you for joining me today on the Isle of Great Cumbrae. I'm gonna sit here and enjoy the sunset for a bit. You watch that show Vikings? I do. Shocker. Who's your favorite character? Mine's Ivor. Somebody's gotta like him. Mostly because he's terrifyingly clever, and Alex Anderson is... I'm off to catch a ferry so I don't get stuck here overnight. Everyone stay well, be kind to yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.